It's Tuesday, April 30th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, and joining me to do just that, fresh off hiatus, suspension, maybe a 3-day bender because the Bears made an ultimate fan service pick just for him, is the one and only Andy Behrens. Andy, what's going on, buddy?
Yeah, many are saying it's been a suspension. I'm not clear to talk about it, so I can't say one way or the other whether I was suspended. But others may speculate. That's fine. I can't stop them. How about that Bears draft, huh? Like we're gonna talk a little like winners, losers off the NFL draft today. But there should be no doubt that I am the biggest winner of the NFL draft. It's crazy. Like, I don't know, like who else would even be in the discussion alongside me? Like, it's not just the Williams and Odunze part. It's the Tory Taylor part. Are you kidding me? My punter? It's crazy. It's crazy they did it.
Yeah, to clear up a couple of things here, if you're somehow new to the podcast and this is the first episode you're tuning into, I am so sorry. But Andy is a tortured Chicago Bears fan. And like, I would say, not even a tortured Iowa Hawkeyes fan. You're just a big Hawkeyes bro, a big Hawkeyes fan.
Yeah.
And the damn Bears took the Iowa punter. The Bears they weren't like, we got 12 picks in the draft. They had very limited picks. They spent one of them on the Iowa Hawkeyes punter, which again is the ultimate fan service pick for one Andy Behrens. So much so that he is wearing a shirt for the people watching this on YouTube that literally says punting is winning. And it is black and gold. I'm guessing that is official Iowa merch, or at least if it's not, it should be. You're gonna have to get that you're gonna have to get that in orange and blue now, pal.
How about it? Tory Taylor had over 4,400 yards of punting last year. like we had so many more punting yards.
Say that one more time.
4,400. It was
4,400. Meanwhile, the Bears have never had a 4,000 yard passer.
Bears have never had like a 3,900 yard passer. Yeah, it was roughly 600 more yards than the Bears all time single season passing record. Incredible. So, he's just like wow. Whatever it is that you come to an NFL game for, whether it's high octane passing offense or whether it's majestic punts that check up at the 4-yard line, you're going to get it next year. I'm so excited.
The Bears never had a 4,000 yard passer. This guy, Tory, 4,000 punting yards. As Odunze came to find out on Bears radio, Johnny Morris is the franchise leader in receiving yards with 5,059. Shout out to Odunze following that up with in the career. That's within shouting distance of your boy's punting yardage from last year.
Yeah,
we'll get into the meat of the show here. I promise. We're going to do winners and losers. We're going to talk dynasty rankings. We'll get into that in just a second. But I do just have to ask you, Andy, are you not worried about like feeling conflicted that like if you're seeing your boy Tory doing a lot of punting, it kind of means that the Caleb Williams thing didn't work out? Are you actually not a little concerned?
I know.
Are you not a little concerned about this is that you could be in conflict here, or is this actually just the greatest emotional hedge possible by Ryan Poles and the Chicago Bears?
It truly is. There was the immediate reports after they draft Taylor that Caleb Williams is already texting him that bro, we're not going to be punting a whole lot in this offense. Which great. I kind of love that. I kind of love that tension between my franchise punter and my franchise quarterback. I love to see it. These are going to be the two pillars of the franchise moving forward. And perhaps there should be a little, hey, it's my team. Hey, it's my team. Who knows? This year we'll settle it. But
competition is good for the roster.
That's exactly right. No matter how each drive ends, I feel I'm a winner.
Wow. I'll tell you what, Andy, you feel like you're a winner. For full disclosure for the listeners, I literally got back from LA this morning. I took a red eye last night. I was a little concerned that I was going to be kind of dragging coming to this podcast, but I'm a pro. Okay. So I'm here, I'm doing the show. That conversation right now just got me so juiced up. I think I can make it through another hour of this pod because of the energy that this whole conversation just provided me.
Took 5 minutes of punting talk. Yeah. I hear you.
And just the listen, like when you see something like that, like again, the Bears lack a 4,000 yard passer, the Bears receiving yard leader being only 5,059, and your guy being squarely in the middle there in terms of his punting yardage last season. That, I mean, I'm a sick freak, but like that brought me a lot of joy to see like that lining up there. And your joy brings me joy, Andy, and it brings me a lot of joy that you're on the show here today. It's been a minute, buddy, so I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that we have a great couple of topics here today. We are going to talk about Andy Behrens' Dynasty rankings, his closest calls in his Dynasty rankings that he just put up on the website. That is going to be later on the show, but the bulk of our conversation here, Andy, is we're going to be the only podcast to do this. Okay. Very original idea. We're going to be doing winners and losers coming out of the NFL draft, skewing towards a fantasy perspective here. And because it's an Andy Behrens podcast, we have to do secret list. I compiled a list of 3 winners and 3 losers. Andy did the same. Because it has been so long, Andy, since we've heard your voice here on the pod, and because I've talked more than any human reasonably should over the last week, why don't you lead us off? Give me your first winner from the NFL draft.
Yeah, I actually wrote a little bit about just off of round 1, off the first night of the NFL draft. I wrote a little bit about winners and losers, and for the most part, I tried to steer clear of those names in this list. Okay. And among my winners, I just listed exclusively veterans who I think came out of the entire offseason process ahead of where they might have been. And I want to start, I guess I'll start with Devin Singletary of the Giants, right? And I, like, to be totally honest, it had never even occurred to me that the Giants wouldn't add another notable running back. Like I did the first version of my fantasy ranks maybe a month and a half ago, and I'd kind of buried Singletary a little bit because I was like, well, surely they bring somebody else in. They can't possibly view him as a good player, right? Like 3 straight 1,000 scrimmage yard seasons. Really, really good player in Houston last year. Kind of saved their running game about a third of the way through the season. So like, I think he's an impressive guy. I just didn't think he'd be the only guy in the backfield. But that's kind of where we're at. They use a 5th round pick on Tyrone Tracy, who was in college forever, played multiple positions at multiple schools. I don't think he's a huge threat to Singletary. And other than that, it's like Eric Gray. It's Brightwell is still on the roster, right? But it sure looks like they're gonna run Devin Singletary as much as humanly possible. Again, I just didn't expect it, so I've had to like vault him up the ranks, dozen spots, something like that. I mean, he's more, I would say, more than a fringe RB2 right now. Like he's squarely in that conversation. He looks like a guy who's going to see plenty of volume.
Producer Colin says in the chat that he could be this year's Alexander Madison, which is not what you want to be.
No, that's a terrible place to be. That's a horrible place to be.
But I mean, won't he squarely be in that like category? Because he's a guy, and several of the players that we might overlap on that I have on my list might also fit in this category too. A guy that like has the clean depth chart, but like how good are they, right? Because you said they're going to give Devin Singletary as much work as he can handle. We've kind of seen how that goes, right? Where he's good for a couple nice games, but he's more of a change of pace back. Like it is, I'm with you. It's bizarre that they did not add another running back to this equation. Weird running back landing spot kind of overall like situation in this year's NFL draft, right? Like outside of the top 2 guys in Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson, everybody else went to like a spot where there's an established starter, and like we all wanted to see who the Cowboys and Chargers and Giants were going to draft, and the answer was freaking nobody. Like or nobody, at least early on. Several teams like the Jets loaded up, like they took 2 of these guys. Teams like the 49ers and the Eagles and the Bucks and the Dolphins, they also have like established guys, and they were the ones taking them in the 4th round. So it was a beyond bizarre like running back landing spot, or maybe not bizarre, but just tough for fantasy that it leaves us to a point like this where, I mean, Devin Singletary looks like he's going to moonwalk into 200 plus touches. But like, again, Andy, what can we expect from a fantasy angle of Devin Singletary with 200 touches on an offensive environment, by the way, that's probably not going to be very good.
Yeah, well, there's that, right?
There is that.
So that's a huge concern. I mean, they loved this guy in Houston last year. Like it was a blast listening to like the radio broadcast team of the Houston Texans talk about Devin Singletary. They absolutely loved him. So I do like, I don't know, I do think there's a fair amount of appeal here. He's obviously going to land as one of these dead zoney running backs that we're not particularly excited about anywhere near the top of a draft. And then you start looking at them and it's like round 5 and you're like, well, who's going to get the touches? Well, who's in his way? And that's always a problematic situation. I get it, because in the NFL, they can always find a guy if you're not getting it done. But Singletary has more or less gotten it done for 3 years. It's not always like in spectacular fashion, but he does appear to be the clear plan in New York. And outside of, I don't know, camp cuts, I don't like, who are they going to add? Like there's nobody right now that I think on that roster can pose a threat to him, a serious threat. And there's nobody sort of looming out there circling. There's no, Zeke Elliott snatched up. So he's not a threat anymore. Like, who are you going to bring in right now that is any kind of threat to Devin Singletary? So I think it's at a minimum, it's another 1,000 scrimmage yards for him. And it's probably his biggest career workload. Like he's got a reasonable, like you can have, especially in a 17 game season, you can have 1,300, 1,400 scrimmage yards, and it still doesn't always feel like a super impactful fantasy season. We might be in for that. We might be in for a low touchdown total here, but I just think in terms of usage and yardage, it is clearly going to be there.
Yeah, you mentioned that Houston loved him. Brian Daboll clearly really likes him, right? This is a guy he has familiarity with back from the Buffalo days, spoke very highly of him when they brought him in. I think I just think that Devin Singletary in a best case scenario is going to give you like perfectly replacement level running back play. I want a little more than perfectly replacement level running back play from the New York Giants offense. Like that's kind of where I'm just at with the whole thing. But I do think this transitions us nicely to my first winner here, because when we're looking at these guys, like, okay, they're running into a lot of opportunity. They're going to fit into that classic running back dead zone. Typically, you don't want to take the guys that are, guys we've seen before, right? We know who they are. You want to take like an upside shot on the unknown. So for me, that's Zamir White. That's going to fit into this group of like, you're looking for not this year's Alexander Madison. You're looking for this year's Rachaad White. Goes into the dead zone because there's just nobody else on the depth chart for touches. Saw something from him as a rookie, but not a ton to just like be, okay, I have a lot of conviction on who this player is. But he's going to moonwalk into a clear-cut starting opportunity. That is Zamir White now at this point. The Raiders also didn't add a running back in the draft except a Dylan Laub out of New Hampshire, who has his fans out there. But again, Zamir White's a guy that the coaching staff showed some faith in. They gave him heavy workloads at times when Josh Jacobs was injured. Now it looks like he's going to be just the clear-cut running back one on this team's depth chart. And like, I think if I'm weighing the two offensive environments together, I have my questions about the juice that's going to come out of the Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew quarterback battle. But I would give a slight edge to the Raiders as an offensive environment overall. And again, the upside of the unknown was Zamir White.
Yeah, White is on my list, and White was actually at the top of my list. Like White was the guy that I was going to build to Zamir White a little bit, but you're right to mention him here. I think he's an overwhelming winner, right? And I guess the reason I have some real optimism about him is I think he scored like one touchdown in the final 4 weeks last year when he just got all the work that he could possibly handle, right? So it wasn't particularly noisy for fantasy purposes, but like if you scooped him up ahead of it was week 15, right? So the Raiders are coming out of that, like one of the worst games in NFL history, that Minnesota game, the 3-0 game that we just don't ever need to think of again. And Jacobs gets hurt in that one. And then immediately it's the Zamir White show. And then for the next 4 weeks, he handles at least 20 touches each game. He gives us over 450 scrimmage yards. Again, only scores one touchdown, but like shows a little something as a receiver. Shows a lot in terms of yards after contact. He's super efficient during that stretch. Some of this is skewed by the fact that they they immediately played that game against the Chargers that got Brandon Staley fired. The Easton Stick game on Thursday night, right? Like, so that was a good one for him. But then, like, he just didn't miss down the stretch last season. And it was, there were enough explosive plays in there, enough 10, 15 plus yard runs that you could feel pretty good about. And again, the usage was just at such a level that, man, it was a nice little proof of concept month for Zamir White. And then the only thing they had in the offseason really is Alexander Mattison to a low dollar 1 year deal. They draft the 6th round running back out of New Hampshire, who I randomly watched some of his post-draft comments, like in local interviews, and he talked up his own ability to play on special teams. So I don't think we need to worry about that guy as an immediate threat to Zamir White or Alexander Mattison. I mean, I just think that's going to be White's show, and he is coming into a season in which but on top of the fact that he might also get 20 touches a game, I think he might be kind of good. I don't think he's special elite blue chip good, but I think he might be better than Devin Singletary kind of good.
Yeah, exactly. That's what makes him so interesting to me, is that he might be good. And again, there's that upside of the unknown, and he's going to, how is he not going to clear 180 carries just based on the way Antonio Pierce wants to play? Like I said, it's an interesting offensive environment. How good do you think this offense can be? Because this is going to be a critical part of the Brock Bowers conversation that we have later. There's real players in here. They add Jackson Powers Johnson in the 2nd round. They're going to have him play guard, not center, just based on the personnel that they have there. I still think it's not the best offensive line in the world. Like I said, the quarterback situation is what it is. But I don't know. You could tell me that the Raiders are the 18th, maybe 18th, 16th best offense in the league. And that's probably good enough for Zamir White to have a really nice fantasy season if he gets the workload we imagine.
Yeah, I think, but again, not to tip the hand too much, but we probably are going to talk about Brock Bowers a little bit later. I think that Minshew in particular is if this makes any sense, he's the worst starting quarterback in the league who can still manage to steer an offense that produces a bunch of relatively useful fantasy producers, right? It can function at the Colts level last year. And I think White can still be a very playable fantasy option. I mean, it's not great. I would love this situation. Love is a little bit strong, but I would have been I would have been more intrigued by this situation if this is where Michael Penix landed, or there was another quarterback that we could throw in the mix that had a little bit of the sort of thrill of the unknown. I think we know what Aiden O'Connell is at his worst, and it's really bad. And we've seen what Gardner Minshew is, and he can direct an offense, but he's probably, his highest and best role in the NFL right now is probably sort of a luxury backup instead of your 17 game starter. That's a little rough. So it's not man, there's so many pieces here that are so fun. It's funny as I was thinking about the end to Zamir White's season. What a ride the Raiders gave their fans in the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season between that KC game and the Chargers game and that terrible Vikings game. That was a trip. I guess it could be a little bit like that again, where there's serious highs and lows. But for the most part, obviously the whole thing is kind of handicapped by it really held back by the quarterback situation, and maybe they can fix that in a year. I don't know. But it definitely places a ceiling on the offense.
Raiders were 21st last year in offensive success rate, which is actually higher than I thought. The Colts were 22nd, so pretty samey there. The difference, though, is that the Colts were 17th in EPA per play on offense, and the Raiders were 26th. So I think there's a similar sort of floor here for the unit from last year, but I think, and this is the only time anyone has ever said this in human history, I think Gardner Minshew can actually help them access a slightly higher ceiling. 17th best offense in the league is kind of what I'm talking about. And that would make Zamir White a very big fantasy winner. Okay, we went positive there. We covered, I guess, 2 winners for you, 1 for me, because we overlapped there. If you want to double back, that's fine. But let's go negative. Give me your first loser from the NFL draft.
Okay, I'm almost cheating here, but there's a topic that I want to get you talking about.
Oh,
So
no.
here's how I'm going to introduce it. All I wrote down in my notes was TBD Bills receiver loser. And so here's what I mean. The Bills have a bunch of players I like. But like you start looking at how they were best utilized last year. I'll just give you the slot percentages for Bills receivers from 2023. Khalil Shakir was in the slot 77.3% of the time and was great in his role, right? Like I don't know if people realize that Khalil Shakir actually had the highest passer rating when targeted like in the damn league last year. He was really good in his role. Curtis Samuel, 70.2% of the time. Dalton Kincaid, 60.3% of the time. So all three of those guys are among the 20 players who are most frequently on their passing snaps in the slot. And then, man, you made like such a compelling case on the Yahoo Live Draft Show over the weekend about what the best use for a player with Keon Coleman's profile, what that might be, and it was as a big slot, right? Like guys who sort of have that history. His limitations and his strengths when they really hit in the NFL, it's as a big slot. Okay, that's 4 slot receivers I've just mentioned, and like those are the 4 main guys. So I guess I just want to have a talk about like who's the odd man out or the odd men out in this receiving core, because I kind of like all these names, but they are all best used in the same way, and I know that can't work out.
Yes, that cannot work out. There are only 2 slot spots on the field. Now I think we have gotten from Brandon Beane pretty clear indication that Keon Coleman's actually going to play X receiver for this team, which I don't love that. If we're looking for this guy to be a 130 like target player, like a true number 1 receiver, you just go down the list of, like in reception perception, you go down the list of guys that have been below average separators. There's not a lot of like true number 1s. Like, I mean, I'm talking below average separators. Like, I'm not talking Mike Williams, who I think is like a league average separator. I'm talking like real struggles to get open against press man coverage. I think your best comparables are like maybe Alshon Jeffrey, like in these Eagles days, maybe Cortland Sutton post ACL, which by the way, like that's not bad. Like, could the Bills use a Cortland Sutton type? Yeah, they could. I just think it's about the expectations of the player. And so I expect Coleman to be the X, and probably still though running a lot of like crossers and winning in tight coverage. And by the way, Josh Allen's the type of quarterback that you want if you're going to have that guy do this stuff. I think Samuel is going to be the flanker who moves into the slot. I think he will take more snaps outside. And my opinion on Samuel as a player is that he can do that. I think we've seen him do that in his days in Carolina. Now he's more so been used by Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator here, and in the Washington days, like as a slot player, but I think he can play outside. And then Samuel and Shakir will kind of alternate slot snaps. I'd guess that the ratio would be 60-40 in favor of Samuel taking more outside work there. And then, Kincaid, like, I just think he just needs to be a regular tight end. Enough already with like the big slot Dalton Kincaid stuff. Just have him be a regular tight end, okay? But my point in saying all that, Andy, is that I think this group could be very Chiefs-esque, where it's a lot of guys that are between like 80 and 100 targets, and no guy that's and they don't have like a Travis Kelce, right? But like, unless Kincaid takes a huge step forward, which by the way is possible, but ultimately I feel like it could be a room of guys where these 4 players, Kincaid included, are all between like 80 and 110 targets or something like that.
Yeah, Kincaid actually had you look at the final numbers just in terms of like receptions, yardage. That was a pretty good tight end season. He just didn't have if he happens to finish with the usual tight end touchdown total, 5, 6, right? Then he's squarely in the conversation as like a top 5 guy this year. And he would have been way higher in the ranks last year. So pretty impressive season. I just think this is one of the most interesting receiving rooms. And obviously Coleman coming off the greatest introductory press conference that anyone has ever seen from a player coming into the league is everybody's favorite player now, right? Like my wife is super into Keon Coleman off that press conference. We're big fans. So I'd love to see him succeed. It's just like it's a group of very good players who there's so much, there's more redundancy. There's a bunch of receiving cores around the league where I just really feel they complement each other well. I don't know if these guys complement each other well. I think there's a lot more redundancy in their games than we'd find a lot of places. But I'm super interested in all of them.
Yeah, I feel a little bit better about Samuel than I probably would have if they'd come out with like another true X receiver. But yeah, I don't feel like a strong pull on any of these Bills receivers, Keon Coleman included. He's a tough guy to rank from a dynasty perspective, I think, right now. Because by the way, I think we'll get to the end of this next season. My prediction is we'll get to the end of 24 and be like, you know what the Bills need? Another receiver. And
Yeah,
they'll be adding another player in the 2024 NFL draft. All right, my first loser is James Conner. And I hate to say this because like James Conner a lot as a player, as a person, I've drafted a lot of James Conner as an Arizona Cardinal just because I feel like he's always undervalued and I think he's kind of underrated. I think this is the year the bubble pops though, Andy, because Trey Benson is good. I really like Trey Benson, like his explosive play potential. I think there will be situations where they want to get him on the field right away. And it's a situation where in previous years, James Conner's missed time. Guys like Michael Carter and Amari DiMercado and whatever go out there. And then as soon as James Conner's available, this coaching staff and the previous coaching staff are like, okay, right back to the big role, right back to the big chair, James, because nobody else can do this and you're pretty good. I think Benson now, if Conner stumbles a little bit, could just take that job right away. So I'm going to find myself probably drafting a lot of Trey Benson this year. And I think James Conner comes away with this with real competition in his backfield on a team that ran the ball pretty well last year, by the way. They were top 7 in rushing EPA. They were top 12 in rushing success rate. I feel like the writing is on the wall here for James Conner to finally kind of have that bubble burst as fantasy's most underappreciated running back.
Yeah, he was so good last year too, right? Like his best games were like legit great. They weren't just sort of accidental volume based good games. Like he's good against Dallas. He was, I don't know, he strung together a bunch of good games, particularly early in the season. But he's also and it's the position takes a beating, but James Conner generally plays like 13 games. So there's always a stretch where he's out. Again, that's certainly no knock on him. It's a difficult position, but man, when that rolls around, Benson is certainly somebody who, and I didn't think of him as a perfect rushing prospect by any means, but man, he's fast and he's got home run ability. You see a lot of that, right? He had multiple good collegiate seasons. Definitely big play potential on almost any touch. And if we get a couple of those in a week that James Conner is out, then it's a real problem for Conner. So I agree with you that he was a pretty clear draft loser. Too bad, because I mean, it's again, he was wonderful last season. Every time he was on the field, I thought he did something. I thought he did something pretty special. But this is clearly a move made not only looking ahead to like 2025, but this is about being able to, because they just did not have a lot behind Conner last year, and it was a huge step down when he wasn't available to them. So I think Benson is a real problem for him. I agree with that.
Were you a good little boy and did as Jason asked and filed your rankings early? Have you done that?
Oh yeah, I had the initial ranks done long ago, and then I was enjoying the Yahoo draft coverage, and as the picks were in, I was updating rookie ranks. Yeah.
Okay, then you were even better than me. I did it Monday morning. But where did you have Trey Benson slotted?
Man, let me bring it up so I'm not saying something completely false here. I have James Conner at RB25, which is that's probably 5-6 slots lower than I had previously had him, and I have Trey Benson. I have Trey Benson at 40.
I have Trey Benson at 20. I went full.
Oh
Dalton.
my!
I went full Dalton Del Don. on this one. And I have James Conner, like as 30, right? So somebody you can take. It's one of those where like this is where rankings are stupid because it's like, okay, do you want production early in the year? You can take James Conner. Do you want, like I said on the previous podcast, I'm very high on what Trey Benson is by the end of the season, the weeks that really, really matter in fantasy football. So, I just kind of want to put that flag plant on him, but he could be like completely useless to start the season. So tough guy to rank, but I just want to put that early flag plant on Trey Benson, especially because I literally got bullied on the draft show on day 2 for being like excited about the Cardinals offense. So I don't know. Maybe I need to dial this one back.
Man. Like that actually, I'm remembering that now. And that does feel unfair. Like, I don't know, Marvin Harrison Jr., Kyler Murray, like a good running game with a competent backup. Trey McBride, like one of the breakout players of 2023. I don't know. Those are some fun pieces. Like Kyler Murray can be fun.
Exactly. Fun. That's what we're looking for here. All right. Let's go back to winners. Let's get positive. You gave us a second one in, we were the same on Zamir White. Do you want to give it another number 2, or do you just want to go straight to your third winner?
Well, I'll give you my third winner, and I'm not totally sure how much he's won, but I'm going to throw Rashid Shaheed out there.
Ooh, I have Rashid Shaheed / A.T. Perry on my list.
Yeah. I could have expanded this to other Saints receivers. I think it's a little bit of an open question as to whether Shaheed can do a whole lot more than what's been asked of him to this point, but we're pretty clearly going to find out, right? Because they have not done very much in the receiving core. He was, people probably know this, he was one of the best and most dangerous vertical threats in the NFL last year. He, on pass attempts of 20 plus yards downfield, he caught 12 of 21, scored 5 touchdowns. Like a deep shot to Rashid Shaheed was one of the best plays in football last year. Michael Thomas now out of the picture. The only really significant draft addition was a 5th rounder, Bub Means, who's himself just kind of a raw downfield threat, who pretty clearly can't fill that role as well as Shaheed has already done it, right? So I just think he's in a great spot. Coming off a year with like 75 targets, there's surely room for growth there. So if we can get him upwards of 100 targets, that could really be a hell of a season.
Yep, I co-sign everything you just said there. I've been a fan of Shaheed beyond just the vertical route running. I think he's a guy who shows you maybe some like John Brownish ability to be like a real route runner and do some full field stuff while also, being able to hit you over the top. Perry's interesting too because he stands out in this receiver room where he's a big guy that has played as a true X receiver in college and showed you signs of being able to beat press man coverage. And again, you just look at this roster, like by and large, I think Chris Olave is going to line up outside and take the flanker reps. I think Rashid Shaheed's going to line up mostly as a speed slot, but can be a flanker in 2 receiver sets. But when they go to 11 personnel, like the guy that you're going to have is like the ISO, big ball receiver there is A.T. Perry. So he's definitely a deeper sleeper. I think, Rashid Shaheed's the more interesting name, but both these guys, I think, escaped the offseason with any true real target competition.
I feel like sometimes I should, and maybe people who've listened to you for a long time certainly don't need this, but like I feel compelled to translate certain comps that you make to the audience. Like when Matt Harmon compares somebody to John Brown, that's good.
Yeah.
Like not necessarily everybody is out there thinking, oh wow, John Brown comp, that's awesome. But like when Harmon says that, that's glowing praise.
Actually, yeah, that's great. We do need like a comp signal for me, like right where this perfectly. Oh yeah, I compared Josh Downs to Sterling Shepard, and like don't forget, like that's actually super high praise. John Brown had 2,000 yard receiving seasons. Okay, yep. Like give me a break. Could have had way more if he didn't have a friggin' sickle cell situation and like played for when Lamar Jackson first got in for the Ravens. He was on pace for 1,000 yards with Joe Flacco that year in 2018. And look, I'm not a Lamar hater. I'm just saying, John Brown, very good player. Everybody relax.
There you go. You've made my point for me.
My God, what a loser. Okay. Since you took one of mine, I'll give you my last one, and then we'll hit 2 losers before going to your dynasty rankings here. I have ancillary Dallas pass catchers as also winners this draft cycle, because I was really trolling producer Colin and every Cowboys fan I know pretty hard by saying, like, you know what they need? They need another receiver. Like, maybe they could take one in round 1. I know you guys want an offensive lineman, but they could just take a receiver. They didn't do that. They actually didn't take a receiver really in any like high level situation. Didn't take a running back either. They just re-signed Zeke. So I think Jake Ferguson, Brandon Cooks, maybe even Jalen Tolbert, who's like, his second season was better than his first, which low bar to clear because he did nothing as a rookie. Maybe he even gets into the mix here a little bit. By the way, I'm a little concerned that we're talking about these are the names beyond CeeDee Lamb in an offense that, like I said, signed Ezekiel Elliott to be the running back 1 in the year 2024. Andy, you had one of the greatest tweets I've seen talking about this situation. That was hilarious. But it's just... I don't think that's a great set of pass catchers, but they're going to run into a lot of opportunity here. So maybe Brandon Cooks becomes like a very, very boring value pick at wide receiver. Maybe Jake Ferguson has top 5 tight end in his range of outcomes. And again, maybe Jalen Tolbert is a sleeper later in your drafts. I think all of those questions, are things I didn't think I'd be asking, because I thought Dallas might throw one pick at a pass catcher. With the fact that they're gonna be one of the most pass heavy teams in the NFL, and they went in a different direction. Really, they didn't take a receiver until Ryan Flournoy from Southeastern Missouri State. Don't have a chart on him, so that's where we're at.
Yeah, it's funny. We spent a lot of time last year talking about the sort of moment in the season when the Cowboys flipped the switch and they're just like, hey, we're a passing team now. This is CeeDee Lamb's team. We're building the whole thing around him. But there was also like when that happened, there was a little bit of trickle down. Obviously, Ferguson had a bunch of good weeks. Brandon Cooks had a stretch of like, I think it was 9 games with 6 touchdowns, right? Like he was a weekly touchdown for a while there, and he was a completely useful player. So I think this is a great call out. And that the other thing that sort of amplifies the signal here is the fact that they've done really nothing of note in the backfield, that it's going to be Dowdle and it's going to be Zeke Elliott. It's just sort of back in the mix. That's not exactly screaming that we're going to recommit to the run in any meaningful way. So this is a really good call out, because I feel like, again, we perhaps didn't pay enough attention to the fact that these supporting receivers, whether we even really like them or not, these supporting receivers were also thriving when CeeDee Lamb was going off. And of course, there's a path here for CeeDee Lamb to have like 190 or 200 targets this season for sure.
Yeah, Andy tweeted yesterday that I love that Dallas is going full running backs don't matter after so recently resetting the market at the position, and it was Zeke each time. That was hilarious. That got a retweet from me. But yeah, man, it's just Dallas's offense is very interesting right now, because I think they're going to need one of those 3 guys beyond CeeDee Lamb. Like, yeah, you can absolutely throw the ball 190 times to CeeDee Lamb and like not feel bad about it. That totally, he's that level of player. But I think you're going to need one, preferably 2 of those players I mentioned to really outkick expectations. I have Jake Ferguson ranked as my tight end 9. I think you're going to want to get him into that like Trey McBride territory to really have this be a good passing offense. Brandon Cooks, like I said, he's going to be super boring. Is anybody going to want to click on Brandon Cooks? Probably not, but like, shoot, you're going to need him to have like a top 40 receiving season to have this offense be good, or you're going to have old Jalen Tolbert take a big step. So that would be interesting to see how that one plays out. Okay, so those are our winners. We have 2 more losers each to get to. Andy, give me your next loser.
I'll start with, and listen, I don't know that he's like lost a chunk of value coming out of the draft necessarily, but it could have gotten so much better for him. I'll just throw out Kirk Cousins. Obviously, and like Atlanta's been talked to death, right? Like we don't need to get necessarily into the Penix pick specifically. But they did have an opportunity at 8 to improve the team in some meaningful way in 2024 and 2025, and they elected not to do it. Right? Like, man, it worked out for me. Rome Odunze was on the board, and they veered away. Right? Like, this could have been an offense that goes into this season with London, with Pitts, with Odunze. That's terrifying. With Bijan in the backfield, pretty good offensive line. Like, that's absolutely terrifying. And whether you did anything to the defense or not, you're a division contender there, right? Like, alongside the Saints and the Bucks, like that alone makes you a contender in a really dangerous offense. They'll probably still be a dangerous offense, assuming that the recovery for Cousins goes perfectly fine. But man, what they passed on is really something. Odunze, or the idea of passing on either Latu or Turner. We'll see. I mean, just generally, like, when an organization has to go into like damage control mode immediately following its first round pick, that's not great. It just could have been such a better situation for Cousins.
Yeah, the Penix pick has been talked to death, but I think the one point you bring up here that's critical is that if I was Kirk Cousins, I'm not just pissed that they took a freaking quarterback and like immediately put me in the crosshairs of, and like, look, he's being paid a boatload of money. I actually don't whatever, Kirk, go like wipe your tears with the money, like, Woody Harrelson in Zombieland. Okay. Whatever. Point being here that he'll be fine, but like, I'd be pissed about the fact that like, you didn't make the team better. I came here. Yeah. You guys friggin' tampered to get me. They're going to lose a draft pick. They're going to lose a draft pick because they wanted Kirk Cousins so bad. And it was because like, oh, this is a good situation to go to. And now it's not really that good of a situation. So yeah, I'm with you. Kirk Cousins, definitely a slight loser, even if it's like from a stats perspective. I don't know. Like, that's the thing. Kirk Cousins has 2 bad games in a row. Can't move around on his Achilles. People are going to want to see Michael Penix. So yeah, it's just right. It's just an awkward situation. I think Josh Jacobs is a slight loser coming out of the draft. Andy, sorry, your boy Josh Jacobs, just because like maybe it doesn't. It caused me basically to like second guess my ranking on Josh Jacobs, where it was pretty high before, and it's still high. I have him at running back 11, but I just think there are now more trap doors for Josh Jacobs to fall through because they take Marshawn Lloyd in the 3rd round. Like, let's just say Jacobs was getting banged up. He's playing through injuries, not as effective. He has a couple bad games in a row. I still would take Josh Jacobs in a compromise for him over giving the ball to AJ Dillon. Okay, now you have Marshawn Lloyd there. Maybe it's a guy that he could eat into that work a little bit more for Josh Jacobs. So I get why the Packers made this selection, even if Damian Harris won't let me finish the sentence that I like Marshawn Lloyd, despite the fumbling, despite that fact that I still like him as a player. Whatever. They also needed to upgrade backup running back because they have now. I think again there are a little more trap doors potential here for Josh Jacobs.
Shout out to Damian Harris, by the way. He was great.
Fantastic.
He was great all weekend. He was fantastic on the show. Made a million good points. Like, really enjoyed it. I haven't moved Jacobs in my ranks. I will say that this did make me pause and make me think about the possibility that perhaps the Packers want to run back a committee arrangement, which of course they've had for years, right? With even when it didn't necessarily appear that Dillon deserved to be part of a committee, they've done it with him and Jones, and I can't rule out the possibility that they intend to do the same thing with Lloyd and right. Jacobs and Dillon. It's out there. We've never seen Jacobs really deployed that way, right? He's been a full workload, like 80% of the snaps kind of player. And in his best seasons, in his best moments, really like rookie year through, a couple seasons ago when he wins the rushing crown. I mean, that guy's awesome to watch. And he's legitimately one of my favorite runners in the league. But that was a moment, and they did take him early enough that you're like, they might actually have a plan for him. And this might be the first time that Josh Jacobs is not, the lone guy in a backfield. Like, even, I don't know, we already talked about Zamir White, but even when Jacobs wasn't running well last year, it was his show exclusively. And we've not really seen anything other than that from him. And this was the first moment when I was like, maybe we're just running back Jones and Dillon. And I've thought about this incorrectly.
The fact that it's a funny money deal doesn't help
Yeah.
Josh Jacobs' cause either. All right, Andy, give me your final loser from the NFL draft.
Yeah, this is the one spot where I just highlighted a rookie, and it was Brock Bowers.
Yeah,
and I'm real happy for Jason Fitz, right? Like I think I'm happy for him and his Raiders.
Who cares? Honestly, what would we rather have happen? Fitz be happy for a couple of days, or Brock Bowers be in like a high octane offense with a creative coordinator and a great quarterback? Like, I know what I'm taking every single time.
Yeah, so this is the thing. Like I don't know. I'd written a piece a couple weeks ago on landing spots for Bowers, and the Raiders did not even cross my mind. Because you're kind of wish casting when you do a thing like that, right? And so you imagine the scenario where the Chiefs trade up for Brock Bowers, or you imagine the scenario where he somehow falls to the Bengals. The chalky pick for Bowers would have been the Jets, right? Aaron Rodgers. That's pretty good. The highest possible landing spot might have been the Chargers, and then he's Justin Herbert's guy. Or, maybe the worst case scenario is the Colts, and that's still a really fun offense. But no, he goes to this theater of pain with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, and he's behind Devontae, and Jacoby had a great season last year, and I don't know, it's a fight for limited targets from a less than ideal quarterback, right? So it's just not a great spot, and maybe this ultimately just saves some fantasy drafters from themselves, right? Because they're Laporta aside, there's just not much of a history of first-year tight ends doing anything notable fantasy-wise. Sometimes you'll see a big touchdown season. Sometimes sometimes we get the Kyle Pitts year where there's no touchdowns attached, but it's a nice yardage total. But I don't know, that's what passes for a great rookie season at tight end. It just doesn't happen a whole lot. So maybe we should have never expected anything great out of Bowers as a rookie, and now maybe nobody's going to be tempted to take him as a top 3, top 5 tight end. I can't imagine they will in Vegas. It's just not, we'd imagine so many great places for Bowers, and he did not land in any of them.
Yeah, I'll stick on this situation and say that Michael Mayer is a loser. Look, maybe Michael Mayer was not going to be, I think he could have been on some sleeper tight end lists, right? I think, and it's important to bring up Mayer here because I just don't even know how this offense looks, because my guess is now we take Brock Bowers, he's the best player available, and we're just going to be a 12 personnel team. But Michael Mayer, even though he has the frame, he's not really a true inline tight end either. And Brock Bowers is definitely in a regular inline tight end. So are they want to run the ball too? Are these two guys capable of being run blocking tight ends? Bowers, no. Mayer, probably not. So it's just a weird group to come together. And the thing that I keep worrying about with Brock Bowers is that a coordinator is going to get his brain in a pretzel and not just line him up and play, right? I think Kincaid suffered through a little bit of that last year too, where it's oh man, we're going to do 11 and a half personnel, and we're going to do all this creative stuff out of the slot, and then teams just put their nickel corner on Dalton Kincaid, and he averaged 5 yards per target for a vast majority of the season. So I don't know if your boy Luke Getsy is perfectly capable of being the guy to unlock this unique room. So for as much optimism that I had about Zamir White, and we weirdly talked a lot about the Raiders on this episode, I do think there's some potential that this just doesn't come together cleanly.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because so much of the conversation, even some of it coming from Bowers himself after the draft, was all the different things he could do, right? Oh, we can put me in the backfield. We can put me in line. We can put me, I can be out. Let's, it's your first year.
Yeah.
It's an imperfect cast of characters in Vegas right now. Let's maybe find a couple things that can work really well for you. Let's maybe not do all the things immediately. It's a really good point. Like if you try to overreach with any rookie, you're really, really asking for trouble. And again, I hate to make the argument that it's just, oh, so many mouths to feed, but there are some mouths that absolutely have to get fed here before we're feeding Bowers, right? So there are just headwinds that he's facing that are not there for a lot of other players.
My overall philosophy now when it comes to like targeting fantasy pass catchers is I'm not trying to go too deep down the target pecking order when it could be a potentially crowded room and I have questions about the quarterback. That absolutely applies to the Raiders situation here. So that is going to make Bowers and Myers and Mayer pretty interesting in terms of like where to rank them and if they really truly have a path to a ceiling or a reasonable floor, to be honest. But all right, those are our winners and losers from the NFL draft. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll give you a brief preview of Andy Behrens' Dynasty Rookie Rankings right after this. All right, we're back. Andy, you put together some Dynasty Rookie Rankings for the website. We won't go through the whole list here because people should go read the article. Not only is the list good, I got my quibbles, but the list is overall good. You also have some great analysis in the blurbs, which is really what people should be reading, less so just names and orders and the real thoughts you put into the players here. But I wanted to kind of just pick your brain. You gave us some of the close calls you had when putting together your rookie rankings. You've got 4 here. Give us your first close call from the rookie rankings.
You're only saying that it's great analysis because I linked to, a bunch of reception, perception, route profiles.
I mean, that helped. when I can open the doc and control F my name and you get some results. Yeah, you did great work, pal.
Yeah, that's really where the analysis peaked, if we're being honest. Yeah, I thought it would be helpful just to talk about a few places where, and look, of course they're wrong, right? Like you look back at anybody's rookie dynasty rankings last year, and it turns out they did not have Puka Nacua at the top, right? Like I'm gonna look back at these things in a year, and they're gonna be hilariously wrong. It's always the case. It is. Yeah, I mean,
you have
really
Malachi Corley 16th overall. I mean, you like what? Let's get serious here, Andy.
That's gonna be the one thing I nailed, actually. Yeah, it's just like this is just unspeakably bad, I'm sure. But we nonetheless have to do it because like almost immediately after the NFL draft, we have some of us have rookie dynasty drafts that hit like instantaneously. And so it is helpful prep for me. And hopefully it is helpful prep for other people. I just thought it would be useful to talk through a couple of situations where and I honestly, I really just want to get your thoughts, maybe set some things up for a future show on the calls that I thought were most difficult. And the first of them was Ladd McConkey, who's a little bit of a pet player for me, versus Brian Thomas, who initially, like just sort of the way I was laying out the tiers at each position, I thought Brian Thomas was maybe kind of a tier of his own guy after the big 3, but ahead of the next sort of really crowded tier. I thought he was a really, really interesting player. But liking Thomas more than McConkey is one thing in a vacuum, but it's quite another like when we actually start talking about landing spot, because obviously McConkey can immediately be the number 1 receiver for the Chargers. The competition is not particularly stiff there. Not great production as a collegiate player, but really passed the eye test, right? And really got himself open. And like the NFL clearly loved him in the run up to the draft. And then Thomas is in a situation where he's, in the pecking order, he's pretty clearly behind Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, probably going to do some of the same things as Gabe Davis, the new arrival, right? Like there's just, it's a crowded place, but I can also imagine a scenario where Thomas really breaks out and he catches some of the balls that Calvin Ridley did not last year, or converts some of the, opportunities that Ridley did not. So I can see a wider range of outcomes for him. Anyway, that was tough. I had those 2 back to back in the ranks.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think this is definitely one of the pivot points in rookie drafts. And I'm glad though we're on the same page that to me, the conversation is Brian Thomas and Ladd McConkey. It's not Xavier Worthy, who I think is He's in the same tier for sure, but McConkey and Thomas are the two guys I went back and forth on for sure. And I hear a lot of your points. I ultimately have Thomas ranked one spot higher, but not by much. Like, and you had the other way around, I believe, in your rankings where you have Ladd 8 and Brian Thomas 9 in your overall rookie rankings. I could see a scenario where Brian Thomas, I keep comparing the DK Metcalf rookie season, right? 100 targets, high yards per reception, high yards per target, 7 touchdowns. Like, I could see that type of season for Brian Thomas. But Andy, and I said this on the show with Charles McDonald last week, or I guess the start of this week, whatever, time is fake. I could see Ladd McConkey being second in receiving yards among rookies this year behind Marvin Harrison, just because of some of the nebulous landing spot type stuff with Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze, and just how pro ready Ladd is, the fact he's attached to Justin Herbert, the fact that like it's a wide open depth chart. He's the best player right now on the depth chart for sure there in LA. So I ultimately, like, I had Brian Thomas ranked higher as a prospect, so I went with Brian Thomas. But I hear your points about Ladd McConkey and that he could be great short and long term.
Yeah, this one felt incredibly close to me, and it's probably one that I'll flip a little bit. I think I would comfortably say McConkey in year one, but I don't really know how I feel for Dynasty, right? Like, I can imagine going either way on this.
Yeah, and in that scenario, like, sometimes if you think a guy just has a much cleaner path to year one opportunity, you give him the edge in Dynasty, because like the Dynasty market is just Dynasty market, quote unquote, the market. I mean, so stupid. Like, everybody has different opinions on these players, but like, the consensus view on Dynasty players can change rapidly year to year. Like, even if people say they want to take the long term, like, guys aren't productive in the rookie season or come in unproductive or whatever, people freak out about it and they panic about it going into year two. Like JSN, great example right now. So, okay, give me your next one here. And just for clarity, because these are a couple quarterbacks you're going to debate here. Your rankings were for single quarterback leagues, not for Superflex, correct?
Yeah, and I realized that almost everybody who's like very online within the fantasy community primarily plays Superflex. It just happens to not be like, it is not the most popular format in our game. So the loud
minority are Superflex players.
Yeah, anybody who's talking about fantasy football online right now in May and June, they're all Superflex players. I get it. It's just not what most people play. So my ranks reflected like a one quarterback system. So these guys were pushed way down my ranks. Obviously, if it's Superflex, you're putting the top 4 quarterbacks basically in the top 5 or 6 overall. I don't think there's much question about that. I didn't have JJ McCarthy and Drake May back to back, but they're pretty close in the ranks, separated by some receivers. I think I'm in the minority here on having McCarthy a little bit ahead. It was for me, it's mostly, and I get it with May. He's got every trait that we want in a quarterback in fantasy, right? He's got rushing upside. He's got the big arm. It's like on paper, it's a little bit of an offensive abyss right now, and it might get better in a hurry. And they did address receiver, and they have to get the receiving room better. And maybe this thing starts looking good earlier than expected. Man, I think McCarthy is actually pretty pro ready for a really young player. I agree with most of what, I'm not like way out on the limb like Thor Nystrom was, but I agree with a lot of what he was saying about like some of the just NFL throws that they asked him to make. And I realized that McCarthy's not like a high volume guy necessarily at the college level, but man, like deep stuff over the middle, deep outs, throws that he was really threading to Wilson and Loveland. Like, I don't know, like that guy made a lot of throws that were plenty impressive, I thought, last year. And as soon as he steps in Minnesota, he's the guy who gets to throw to Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson. He's got Aaron Jones in the backfield. Like, that is clearly like that was the premium situation in which a rookie quarterback could land. I don't know when he takes over, but I bet it happens this year. I'm not that worried about him sitting an entire season. That is not the story of his career to this point. So I have McCarthy a little bit ahead. And then as soon as I sort of picked my head up out of the content mines on Sunday and Monday, I realized that was very much not like consensus at all. Like, folks seem to be taking May ahead of him, comfortably ahead of him. I had a guy tell me that Drake May is his best comp is Josh Allen. Okay, be great to have another Josh Allen. I'm all for it. I hope he becomes Josh Allen. But I don't know. There's more enthusiasm out there for Drake May. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I actually think this might not end up being that hot of a take. I think that by like midsummer, it might be just like, yeah, McCarthy's the better fantasy quarterback. Even if I think the listeners of this podcast know my thoughts on McCarthy and like kind of my journey with him as a player and where I arrived at a pretty good place with him, and that I've always been a fan of the tools with Drake May. I will say 2 points in your favor. Number one, the classic Andy Behrens line, he's the guy that gets to, and what McCarthy gets to do in Minnesota, throwing to Justin Jefferson, all that stuff. It's just great. Like, it's the best incubator, best ecosystem for a young quarterback you can really possibly imagine. Even if we like what's going on in Chicago, like having Kevin O'Connell and having Justin Jefferson, that's huge for a young quarterback. Okay. So that's a favor in JJ's point. I also have come around after draft night. I thought like, yeah, McCarthy maybe doesn't start. I think McCarthy actually probably starts all the games. And I think Drake May could sit in New England. I think like Jacoby Brissett's, you just think like, okay, one of these guys needs to develop, maybe not have like some bad habits. Because like what bad habits, unless McCarthy just stinks, what bad habits is he going to develop in Minnesota's ecosystem? Or like what battle scars, I should probably say, is he going to develop in Minnesota's ecosystem? Whereas Drake May, even if I'm high on what they did at wide receiver in this class, like in this draft, there's a chance he gets some real battle scars playing in New England. So you have a guy that can hold the fort down to Jacoby Brissett. Why not just let him play the first month and a half of the season, and then you get Drake May in there? The part that is giving me a little bit of pause here, Andy, is like I said, the overall tools with Drake May, I do think are higher than JJ McCarthy. And we've definitely, the general we of the fantasy industry and the NFL draft community has hammered the point home correctly that McCarthy has more athleticism than you think. Drake May ran 112 times in 12 games last year for 449 yards and 9 touchdowns. The year before that, in 14 games, ran 184 yards, 698 times, and 7 touchdowns. Like, this is a guy that will take off and do some Josh Allen wild horse stuff. So he could have more rushing upside, I think, than we give him credit for.
Yeah, this is the thing. I do think that I do think it's completely realistic that like 3 years out, 4 years out, May not only has the higher ceiling, but maybe reaches that ceiling and then like that would be a phenomenal player. That is definitely in play. And this is also the one position, like normally if I'm ranking for Dynasty, it's going to look a lot like my redraft ranks because I just don't think you should make super long-term plans in the NFL, right? Like, I don't know, go back and look at preseason ranks from 3 years ago, 4 years ago. You'll see a bunch of guys who aren't in the league, right? Like, it's just, you should generally rank for the current season in Dynasty, except at quarterback, we can afford to look to the future a little bit more. And this is where I think, like, if Drake May starts to, like, if the actual outcome begins to match some of the tools, then this is kind of an embarrassing rank and he could crush it.
All right, give me your third close call.
Yeah, this is one I think you're really going to hate because and I will say, like, Trey Benson and Blake Corum were not actually close in my published ranks, right? Yeah. I think they were like 10 and 17. In my head, they were a little closer. And just like at the position, I had them a little closer. We've already talked through the James Conner situation and Benson, and I guess where I'd come down is that there's a chance that he takes a meaningful percentage of the touches this season, and there's like he's the overwhelming favorite. I think probably in 2025 to be the lead back there. So that's a great sign. It's really complicated for Corum, and he's got one of last year's fantasy heroes ahead of him in Kyren Williams. It's just he's tied to a McVay offense. They went out and got him. He was kind of playing in a compromised state most of last season, and still scored in every game for Michigan, and usually scored twice in each game for Michigan, was just like just an unstoppable game wrecker. So I think he's good. And I think he's better than what he most recently showed. So I think there's a chance that he, and again, this isn't McVay's habit necessarily, isn't necessarily to let's have a 2-man committee, let's have a multi-headed committee. But I think there's a chance that Corum takes some meaningful snaps here and has a real role. So I think both of them are very interesting. There's not a ton of running backs in this class that I'm super into for fantasy purposes. No. I would leave most of them alone. I see people talking up some players that I just don't have any interest in whatsoever, but I am interested in both Benson and Corum.
Yeah, this one is easy Benson for me, just because I'm willing to believe really anything about how this Rams backfield plays out, man. Because when they talked up Blake Corum after drafting him, they basically just said he was so similar to Kyren Williams, and that's why we loved him. It's like, yeah, that's what's going to make this really hard to project, is that you kind of have a clone back there. It's not okay, and passing downs, we like this guy. So what's the percentage chance that Kyren Williams runs out as the full-time feature back for 17 games next year? Then what's the full-time, what's the percentage chance that I don't know, what if Blake Corum's just better than him? What if he gets in there and he just looks better than Kyren Williams? I don't think that's impossible. I think it's maybe slightly improbable just based on what Kyren did last year. But geez, yeah, I don't know. And I guess we could see, no, it's not in McVay's history, but coaches do they have histories and patterns until they don't, right? And maybe that he just loves these guys as a 1-2 punch and wants to keep them both fresh because they have injury concerns and stuff like that. So we could just be looking at a straight split down committee that isn't easy to map in terms of skill sets to game scripts and all that stuff like we normally have a running back. So I just don't have a lot of conviction on Blake Corum, because you could tell me how this scenario goes and I'd almost be ready to believe anything.
Yeah, I knew, a while ago when you said that you had Trey Benson as your RB20, I was like, oh man, he's going to hate this rank. He's going to,
you have him at 10. You have overall, you have him at 10, behind the two quarterbacks we're about to talk about next, behind Brock Bowers, behind Jonathan Brooks, behind, the top 5 receivers, including Ladd and Brian Thomas there at 4 and 5. That's fine. I don't have so much conviction on Trey Benson that I'm willing to take him over any of those other guys. But I think that's fine. And yeah, I think your mid-second round ranking of Blake Corum is also fine, because it's running back and it's a great environment. You got to take your shots, right? Everything we said about James Conner and he could get hurt and then just never get the job back, that is also available for Kyren Williams and Blake Corum. Knock on wood, we don't want to see it happen. He was, like you said, a fantasy hero last year, but it is possible.
Yeah, the thing that ultimately tips it in for Benson for me is that my own belief that they must be looking ahead to 2025 and seeing him as their that is their preferred option, right? Because a lot of miles for James Conner, a lot of injuries for James Conner. I think he almost certainly has the job 2 years out.
All right, your final close call in Dynasty involves your boy here, Andy. Caleb Williams.
I want to be clear. This is actually not close for me personally. I would probably actually draft Caleb Williams higher than I ranked him, because I'm at heart, I'm just a meatball Bears fan. So there's not a scenario, not even one time out of 100 would I take Jaden Daniels ahead of Caleb Williams. But I'm willing to admit that is about my personal fandom. I can also imagine the scenario where we get a 99th percentile sort of rushing season at the quarterback position for Daniels, right? It's the one cheat code he's got that, and Williams is a good runner, obviously, right? I think maybe 21 rushing touchdowns over the last couple of years at USC. When he had to do it, he was great at it. It's in his bag, but it's not, it's not like a breathtaking trick like it is for Daniels, who 1,100 yards last year. Great on the ground. We could get a wow rushing season out of him. The issue for Daniels, and I don't need to belabor the point that people have surely seen on Twitter, they've seen online, right? He gets rocked a lot. And he's not really built for it either necessarily, right? and that that does not happen to Lamar Jackson. That does not happen to rushing quarterbacks who stay rushing quarterbacks. So I do worry about that. It's not it's obviously a great situation in Washington. In my mind, it's not as rich as the offensive environment is in Chicago right now, which is a weird thing to say. But little bit of injury worry with Daniels. But enough people are out there telling you that Daniels is a potential top 10 fantasy quarterback in year one. And I can see the path. I get it. It involves a huge rushing total, which might very well happen.
Right. That's the thing. It might very well happen. And then this conversation is going to be extremely close. But yeah, you just put what Washington has around Daniels is fine. Right. The running backs are pretty good. Like the duo there. I like Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, but they took Luke McCaffrey in the bottom of the third round. It's that was not a needle moving pick to me. Jamison Crowder, De'Ami Brown are kicking around the end of that depth chart. The offensive line, Chicago's, I think, come a little bit overrated as an offensive line. It's an acceptable, solid offensive line. Washington is not that. Okay. They've got issues on the offensive line, and their tight end is still Zach Ertz or Ben Sinnott, who they took in the third round. I like Ben Sinnott, by the way, but is he going to be ready to rock in year one? Is he Sam Laporta? I don't know about that. So nobody's Sam Laporta according to Andy Behrens. So
you can't throw around Laporta comps.
Sure. And regardless of your opinion of Shane Waldron, how much of a needle mover as a coordinator he is, I have a little bit more faith that that's going to be a grown up offense than I do with Cliff Kingsbury. So I just realized that Daniels could run for 100 yards in his first game, and immediately we throw this take in the trash. But I just overall have more faith in Caleb as a prospect and what he is walking into from a surrounding situation, that I would probably stick with Caleb. But again, I understand that dude, rushing production at the quarterback in fantasy just cures all ills.
Yeah, it's really hard to overstate how crazy this is that Caleb, as the number one overall pick quarterback, is coming into a situation with DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Odunze. This just does not happen. And we've seen some other first overall picks come into good situations, but man, this was good before the Odunze pick, and it's just crazy now. There's part of me as a longtime Bears fan that says, man, if any franchise can figure out how to screw this up, this is the one. But it's also this is a new front office, and this is, I don't know, these are new people at the controls, and things are feeling good right now. So I can easily imagine Caleb Williams finishing as a top 10 fantasy quarterback in year one with a little bit of rushing and a lot of passing and breaking all the franchise records.
That is Andy Behrens, and he is ready to have his heart broken based on the sentence that just came out of his mouth. Andy, appreciate you doing this, buddy. I mean, from punters to top 10 quarterback, Caleb Williams in his rookie season, you said it all, man, and I appreciate you doing it.
Oh, it was a pleasure. I had to get it on the record.
Yeah, he had to get it on the record now. I mean, you got, again, like I said on the last podcast, if you're going to do stuff like that, you better say it here in late April when, really it doesn't matter. Don't be coming on. Andy will not be coming on this podcast in August and saying that. Although maybe he will. Maybe we do another show from the Expo after you've had a few drinks and he's Caleb is top 5 by then. Really? Can't rule anything out. Can't rule anything out when it comes to this program and Andy Behrens. That is going to do it for this show today. Hell of a show. On Thursday, Matt Waldman joins me for a rookie dynasty mock draft, and we're going to go at least 2 rounds deep, maybe even 3 if we have the time, because Waldman is a sicko. He knows all the players, and I want to get his thoughts on some of these guys further down the draft board that maybe we haven't talked about. But until then, we're out.